On this episode of Strength Coach Tutorials, I am going to show you how to make this dynamic athlete comparison chart, which has a gold and bronze standard, which we can choose with a drop-down menu, as well as you can select the start date of the test that you want to display, or whichever athlete that you would like to look at. So as you can see, as I change the different parameters, this chart automatically updates to reflect my selection. This is going to be a really powerful chart if you would like to compare athletes versus one another or have them displayed versus a set standard that you create. So let's get into it. Okay, so we're back and we are starting off with a sheet and it has some data on it. And then all I've done to go ahead and set up this sheet is I've just added some names down here at the bottom where we're going to pull out some different values, as well as added the spacing where we are going to do our drop-down menus. So in order to get this started, this project is a little bit formula heavy, but I'm going to try to walk you through it as best as I can. And we'll be able to use these techniques with lots of different types of graphs. So in order to get started, we just have to do a few things to set this sheet up. Number one is I'm going to take this chart down here on the left-hand side, and I'm just going to format that as a table. So I just go to Home, Format as Table, and I'll select my table has headers. And then for ease, I'm going to name this table. So I go to Table Design, and I'll go TBL Date, or Data, sorry. And it's going to be named Table Data. Now from there, what I want to be able to do is actually pull out the different values from my table. A reminder, this is probably only going to work in the newer versions of Excel 365 specifically, since we are going to be using a lot of spilled array formulas, and those features weren't really available in some of the older Excel versions. So how we're going to pull out the names is we're going to use a unique function. So I'm going to type equals unique. And what unique does is when I select this table column, what it does is it will only pull out the values once. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing for dates. So I'll type equals unique and pull out all of the dates. And all I'm doing to do this is just selecting at the top of my table, and it automatically selects the whole column. Then I close off that bracket and it pulls out all of the values. You can see here under the dates, it's just format them as a number. Easy thing to do is just take this column and then I can go back to more number formats and turn it into a short date. And then we don't actually have any standards yet, so let's create those. So we'll make a table for that. We'll go to standards, or a gold and bronze, and we'll turn this into a little table. And I'm going to just call this table standard. And let's just type in our bench press standards. So let's say 180 is our gold standard, and let's say 100 is our bronze standard. And then we'll pull out the standards the same way we did in the other table. We'll type equals unique. And now I will select the column for standards and then hit enter. And because we've used the unique and because we've referenced the different tables, if I was to add another one here and call this maybe 200 and 150, you can see that it automatically adds that to our values down here. So you don't have to do this, but it just makes it easier for all of your references. Now what I'm going to do is create my drop-down menus. So I'm just going to bold these, and then inside this yellow cell, I'm going to go to data validation, and I'll select list. And what I want it to choose from is A27, where we've actually pulled out those values. And then if I use a hashtag, it will refer to that whole spilled array. So what that looks like now, it chooses Dave, John, or Jim. And the way that I can check to see if that's working, I can just go anywhere on my file and go equals this top one and then hit the hashtag. And you can see as soon as I do that, it references the whole thing. And if I hit enter, it pulls all of those out. So let's select Dave. I'm going to copy this down and paste it so that will work automatically. And then we'll do one for our start date. Same way we just did, but I'll choose the first date and then use the hashtag, hit OK, And then for our test, we'll do the same thing. Hashtag, and then we'll do one last time for the standard. So I know that was kind of fast, but all we did was do a data validation at each level, and that just allowed me, or I put the hashtag in there, and it just allows me to select from these values that I've already pulled out. If you were setting up this sheet to be more of like a bigger project, you might want to put all of these values on another sheet that you would call maybe control panel or settings or something, and then have your whole sheet sort of reference those. So moving forward, now what we have to be able to do is pull out our actual data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in some values over here. Namely, we want date, athlete 1, athlete 2, gold, bronze, and a helper cell. And what this is going to do is just give me a spot where I can pull the values out of my actual table and based on the selections that I make. So the first thing that we want to do is for the date, I'm going to filter out all of the dates. So I'm going to go equals filter, and I'm going to select date. And I want to filter out the dates when it is greater than or equal to my start date. And then it's going to ask me what I want to do if it's empty. I don't want to do anything, and I'll close that off. So you can see now, turn those into dates again. It has actually copied out all of those dates. Okay. So if I were to select a date that's later on, you can see that because we've chosen that it's greater than or equal, it takes away those dates. But if you notice, there's going to be duplicate values in here. So we have 1, 1 here, 1, 1 here. So what I want to do is only take them out once. So this filter formula that I used, where I filtered out the date when the date is greater than or equal to, we can wrap this whole formula in a unique. And when I do that, now it takes that whole array and just takes each one of those dates out once based on the unique value. Okay, so that's a quick way to just take your filter value and then take all of your dates out only once. Now the next thing that I want to pull out is the actual values. So I'm going to type in equals sum ifs. And I'm using sum ifs because it's not really going to matter because there's only one variable per day. So it's not going to really sum anything. But what I want to sum is the sum ifs is going to ask me what the range is. And in this case, it's going to be the value. And then it's going to ask me what my criteria is. And in this case, I want it if the athlete name column, comma, is equal to the athlete name that we've selected, comma, the athlete date column, comma, is equal to the date. And then remember, we want it to be a hashtag because we want to refer to the whole thing. And I'm actually going to lock that in with F4, and I'll lock in the name with F4 because that's never going to change. And then finally, when the athlete test column, comma, is equal to the test that we choose. And I'll lock that in with F4. And when I close that off, what you're going to see is that it's actually pulled out all of those values based on those selections. If any one of those weren't true, it takes those away. Okay. So that's how we're going to do that. And then the last thing that I want to do is I actually want to give this an error when it doesn't find the value. So what I'm going to do is wrap this whole thing in an if function. So I'm going to type if this whole thing equals 0. Then what I want it to do is give an error. And the way that I do that is go NA and then 2 brackets. But if it doesn't, if it's false, then I want to run the whole thing. So this formula gets pretty long, but basically what it's saying, if sum ifs all of those values equals 0, so it would be these cells here. If it does, then I want it to equal an error, so NA brackets. If it doesn't, then I want to actually pull out the sum ifs value. When I hit enter, it still does the same thing, but it just adds this NA in each of these cells. And this is going to be important for some of our filters later. So then the easy way to do this is if we just copy this and I paste it in under athlete 2, and instead of athlete name at G1, now it's at G2. And again, instead of athlete name at G1, now it's at G2, and I hit OK. You can see that it pulls out the other values, and we can check to see if this is working just by shifting the name. Now, the next function that I want is actually I'm going to create this helper cell first, and I'll show you why in a second. Basically, what I want the helper cell to do is if there's a value in either one of these two cells or either one of these two columns, I want it to give me a value of 1. So how I can do this is I go equals if is error this, the whole thing, okay? If that equals true, then what I want it to do, if it's true, I go if the next one is error, the next set of columns equals true. Then, so what this is saying, if this one is an error, and then if the next one is error, what I want it to give me is actually an error, or else what I want it to give me is a value of 1, close that off, and a value of 1, close that off, and when I hit OK, what this actually does now is if either of these is an error, it gives me a value of 1. Okay, sorry. If neither of these is an error, it gives me a value of 1, but if both of them are an error, then it gives me a value of nothing. So let's see how this works when I switch around the names. So you can see there are values in all of these cells, so we get 1s all the way through. And I'll show you why that's important in a second, but we're just going to kind of put that together. So then the next thing that we want to do is actually pull out our standards. So the easy way to do this is I'm just going to reference the helper cell now. So I go equals if this, remember all the way down, equals 1. Then what I want to do is pull out my standard. So I'll type in VLOOKUP, and I want to look up this value, the standard that we've selected. Where do I want to look it up? In this table. And what column do I want is number 2, because that is where our value is stored. Close that off, and then close off the whole thing. And you can see what it's done now is if there's a 1 there, it's going to reference the gold. And then I'll just copy this one more time, paste it, and now I just want to reference the third column. So there's our standard, and check if this is working. If I change my standard, these values should change as well. So now the last thing that we have to do is just pull out these values based on whether there's NAs or not. So we want to clean this data up a little bit. So I'm just going to type in another spot here. So I'm just going to type in data cleaned, and we're going to use some filter functions here. So I'm going to type equals filter, and what I want to filter is this whole range. If is error, and then the value that I want to look at is this helper cell, equals true. Sorry, equals false. And then if not, bracket that off. So what has this done? So basically what we're doing here is checking to see if any of these are an error. And then if it's not, I want to filter out all of the dates. So I'm going to just copy this over and paste it. And this time I want to filter out O2, which corresponds to athlete 1. And then I want to, instead of O, now we want Q. Whoops, why didn't that work? Yeah, Q2. Oh, because that one moved over too. Okay, one sec. Sorry, that should be P. That's my mistake. So I'm just going to copy this over a few times. To reference all of the different cells. So I'm just going to bring these all back to center. So what I've done here is I've just created another filter where we filter these out if there are no NAs. So in this case, it's removed the 8, 2, 20. But if I were to select some different people, you can see it shrinks the data set down kind of considerably. So that is now, our data is now clean and ready to be used in a chart. So what I'm going to have to do now is I'm going to turn these now into named ranges. So I'll select the first cell, Control Alt F3, and it's going to pull this out, and we're going to call this one date video, and I want to refer to this whole thing. So it's going to be F8 hashtag. Okay, so when I type that in, date video, it's going to pull out all of those dates. So then we need to do it for all of them. So Control Alt F3. This one will be athlete 1 video, and then hashtag. I'm just going to do this all the way across for all of them. Athlete 2 hashtag. This will be gold video. This last one will be bronze video. So then the last piece is now I just have to create my chart. So I just select all of these values and go to Insert, Recommended Charts, All Charts. Let's go a column chart and hit OK. There's a couple things we have to do to clean this up. So number one, what I'm going to do is format the axis. And you can see that what it's done is going from 1,120 to 7,120 and giving me all the values in between. There's an option here on the side. If I go to text axis, it will just show each value by itself. Okay, so that's number one. That's the first thing that we have to do. I'm just going to move this chart out of the way. We'll make it a little bit bigger. And now we're just going to edit some of these series a little bit. So what I'm going to do, right click, select data, my series 1, I'm going to edit it. We know that that's going to be referring to my first athlete. So series name, I'll just select the first drop down box, and then where it says G8 to G14, I'm going to call it athlete 1 video, hit OK, and then we'll do the same thing for the next one. Series name, we'll call this athlete 2 video. Series 3, edit, we know this is going to be our gold standard. Sorry about that. So we'll call this gold video, hit OK. And then series 4, we know this is going to be our bronze, and we'll call this bronze video. And then for here, we know that these are going to be our dates, so we'll call this date video. And these are just the names that we used before. I'm going to hit OK. Now what I have to do is change series chart type. So my gold, I actually want to be a line, and my bronze, I want to be a line as well. When I hit OK, you can see now those are lines. Let's just make the gold one gold. Make it a bit bigger so we can see it. And then we'll make the bronze one sort of like a bronze color. Make it a bit bigger so we can see it. Then we'll just do a little bit to these charts here. We'll give it a solid fill, maybe about 50% transparency, because I think that just helps things show up a little bit easier. And there we go. There is our chart. So you can see what it's doing is referencing these values that we've pulled out from our cleaned data. And then as I select, let me just make this a little bit smaller so we can see. As I select new values, so if I select John, our chart automatically updates to include John's values. If we were to select a date that's a lot further away and we want a different starting date, you can see that it automatically changes the graph to represent that. Or if we selected a different bench standard, you can see that it moves our standards based on that. Let's add another variable, see what that looks like. Dave, and maybe 8/2/2020, BP, and maybe he did 400. So you can see automatically as we update this data, that data is automatically included. So just to recap kind of what we did, we took our data table, used a unique function to pull out all of the data for our drop-down menus. Then we created our drop-down menus, then our standards table, and then we used some filters, some ifs, and different cells to pull out all of our data. And then we cleaned it based on if there was any NA values or not, so that our chart would look nicer. And then we turn them all in name ranges and use them for our chart. So I hope this video helps you out. I know that it was kind of formula heavy, but there's a lot of good skills in there that can help you with your own charting. If you have any questions about this video, feel free to comment below. If you have any ideas for future videos, just put them down in the comments below. Like and subscribe to this channel because that really helps me out. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you.